That wasn't my voice, just to be clear. Hello again, and welcome to those who've joined since I said hello the first time. So there are 6 people here who have a role in chaplaincy or have worked in chaplaincy in the past, who are going to be sharing some of their stories and being willing to answer all the questions that you can throw at us. No question is off limits, I think. We'll see what we get to. There are only 6 of us, not 7, because I can't count. But it'd be useful to know who we are first, and also to get a little bit of a sense of who else is in the room and what experience there is. Because at least one person here I know has been doing some chaplaincy with my university. Hello, Mother Claire. So I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves really quickly, like who are you, where are you, and then we'll move on to everyone else. We've got about 7 minutes to get through 30 people on this, so let's not give each other our whole biography, but just a sense of who we are and what our role or interest in chaplaincy is. So Mark, could I ask you to go first, please?
I'm Mark Spencer-Ellis. I'm the coordinator of the chaplaincy at Snaresbrook Crown Court. It's actually the 3rd chaplaincy I've been involved with, because in the 1990s I was involved with setting up chaplaincy at Redbridge Night Shelter, which I ran, and then 10 years later the one in Newham, which was very, very different. And we'll explore the differences a bit later.
Thank you. Robert Stone, could you tell us, we know who you are, I've just told you your name.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Robert. I'm currently the vicar of the Rodings, Easters and Great Camfield in the sort of northwest of the county. But I have a long background as a self-supporting minister, as a reader, and then as an SSM curate. And I worked for a very long time in local government, far too long in local government, and was involved in being a Christian presence there. I'd never really thought of it as chaplain, so I'll just leave with the idea of Christian presence, and like Mark, I'll tell you a little bit more later on.
Thank you. Linda, could you tell us a bit in one line who you are and what you do? I can actually tell that from your Zoom. Cool, very helpful.
I'm Linda Peel. I'm head of chaplaincy at where am I? East Suffolk and North Essex NHS Foundation Trust. And I went onto a ward today that had a sign outside saying "No nuts allowed," and I thought, I better not go on the ward then.
Andrew, can you follow that?
I'm certainly a nut. I'm the rector of the Tenpenny Benefice just east of where Sarah is, Essex University. And previously I was in Beer Church for 12 years. And while I was there, contextually, I connected up with 2 and 3 para, and then the medical regiment, and then some soldiers with PTSD. But I was vicaring and had a little play at being a chaplain. I wasn't a proper chaplain.
And Bex, please, who is a proper chaplain?
Well, it depends. So my main chaplaincy role is I'm chaplain to 2 FE colleges, a sixth form college and Colchester Sixth Form College and Colchester Institute. I'm also part of the chaplaincy team for Essex and Herts Air Ambulance.
Thank you. So that's our main speakers. Now, who else is in the room is also really interesting. So I'm going to go across my screen again, and I'm going to start with Stephen Norris, because you're first on my list. So just really quickly, who you are, where you are, what your interest is, please.
Okay, Stephen Norris, newly minted licensed lay minister. And I too spent too long in local government, being a Christian presence there. And I'm interested because my wife is the chaplain, one of the chaplains in Chelmsford Prison, and she reports how the need for chaplaincy in that organisation. So I thought I'd explore it.
Thank you. And Caroline, Reverend Caroline.
Hi, I'm in my first year of curacy at the Hennings Benefice, and I'm here just because I'm interested to find out more and how I could perhaps work that in with my ministry.
Thank you. Jeff Clark, you're next.
Hi, I'm second year curate in North Romford, Collier Row, Havering Atty-Bower. I've already been talking to my TI about the potential of doing a chaplaincy placement to learn a bit more, but again, like Caroline, I want to know a bit more about what chaplaincy is and means.
Thank you. Dawn.
Hi, I'm in my first year curacy in Broomfield, and just always felt a call towards hospital chaplaincy.
Thank you. And Mike Tricker.
Hello there. Yeah, so I'm a second year LLM. Got licensed during lockdown, so that kind of made a pickle of the first year or 18 months of it. Have always had a nagging feeling about chaplaincy, didn't really know what it was, how to do it, even with an LLM could be one. So I was delighted when Andy included LLMs in the list, and decided to explore it some more because it's been nagging away at me for a little while now.
Brilliant. Thank you. Olive, you're next on my screen.
I've been a chaplain, workplace chaplain at Westfield from, I would say, 5, 6, 7 years, and a hospice chaplain. I'm looking now to go back, particularly to Westfield, and looking for some sort of new ideas, really, and some new enthusiasm after all these years of experience.
Thank you. Teresa Lowe.
Hi, third year SSM curate at the Two Rivers Benefice. I've been in education all my life as a teacher, did a placement at St Nick's Hospice during my training, and suddenly realised that I was called to do that as well. So just finishing off the curacy and then seeing where that goes and how that all fits in.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Neil, please. Oh no, the screen's just changed. Ah, yes, Neil. But you've disappeared now. Where have you gone?
I'm still here.
Perfect.
I'm still here. I'm Neil, first year curate at St Luke's in Cranham, and I too have just had a nagging feeling about chaplaincy, so that's why I'm here.
Thank you. Marianne.
Hi, I'm Marianne Hayward. I'm a second year curate and I'm a minister in secular employment as a psychiatrist in the NHS. And I'm here because, I mean, I'm fairly kind of clear about the difference between MSc and chaplaincy, but I think it's an interesting and relevant conversation for me. And I think perhaps an MSc slant might be useful for others here too.
Great, thank you. Urbane.
Hi, I'm second year curate back in Riverside. I'm here just to learn, to be honest.
Okay, well, let's hope it's useful. Mother Claire.
So I'm a first year curate in Westcliff and Southend. With a colleague here, we have been trying to resurrect the chaplaincy at the Southend campus of Essex University. And I'm also really interested in prison chaplaincy too.
John. There's only one John, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. So John, third year curate. I was self-supporting, so I work in the NHS as a pharmacist as well. So I do work alongside or see sort of the chaplaincy at Princess Alexandra Hospital. So again, just keen to see and explore that, and probably a bit like Marianne, you know, I very much feel my calling is in the workplace. So very interested to, you know, see how that plans out.
Thank you. And Lyselle is next on my screen.
Hello, I'm a third year curate in Colchester. I have a sense of call to being part of a residential community, so just thought it'd be a good opportunity to come and hear about chaplaincy, if that might be something useful for the future or in what's going on, or just something that's potentially different from parish ministry.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Penny.
Hiya. So I'm second year curate, self-supporting at All Saints Church in Cranham, and chaplaincy has been on my heart forever. And I did a placement a few years back under the watchful eye of Linda Peel, and it was brilliant. And I just felt like I'd come home really. So yeah, just want to find out a bit more about it and see where we go from here.
Thank you. Oyen, and apologies if I've pronounced that incorrectly. Tell me how to say it if I got it wrong.
That's okay, thank you. My name is Oyen. I'm a first-year curate at Ascension Church, Custom House, London. Last year, I was the chaplain cadet at the University of Oxford Officer Training Corps, basically the cadets. I'm not now, and I am still looking to do military chaplaincy at some point in future. So I thought to come here and learn.
Thank you. Catherine.
Hello, I'm a second-year curate in Bocking. I've worked with Bex to establish chaplaincy in the Braintree branch of Colchester Institute, FE College here. And I did a placement at Little Hay Prison as an ordinand, and I've got 2 children in the armed forces. So I may be considering chaplaincy in the armed forces, which is a very specific specialism, really.
Thank you. Jessica.
I'm a second-year SSM curate in Epping, and we are trying to currently resurrect a chaplaincy that our predecessor was sort of looking after before COVID at the local council, and there's a new autistic school who are keen for me to go in and be a chaplain to them. So I'm looking for any pointers I can get, frankly.
Thank you. And Janetta, I think, is last. If there's anyone who hasn't spoken, wave violently at me now.
Okay.
Oh, brilliant. Right, Janetta, you're up.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm Janetta, a second-year curate in Newham at St. Saviour's Church. I also am a welcomer at Westfield. Have an interest in chaplaincy and have been tutored by Reverend Christie. And I'm doing that at the moment. I'm looking forward to working with Olive and there. And I think this session would help me a lot to understand more of chaplaincy.
Brilliant, thank you. So on our agenda, we had introductions. We also had facts, figures, and prayer. So having introduced us all, I'm going to just say a very quick prayer for the rest of the evening, and then I've got a pie chart. So Heavenly Father, thank you for everybody who is here this evening, for our speakers, for those who will contribute in different ways, and for those who may just want to sit and listen. We thank you for the broad range of experience and talent and callings that are represented here. And we pray that our evening together will help us feel inspired into whatever happens next with your call on our lives. Amen. Right, I've got to find the pie chart, and I've got about 6 windows open on my computer at the moment, so please bear with me while I find what I'm looking for. Right, here we go. It's a very simple pie chart. This is just taken from the most recent ministry statistics from the Church of England, just showing really the breakdown of people who are in full-time chaplaincy roles. There's apparently there's 170 stipendiary clergy who aren't listed as part of this pie chart. You probably can't read the descriptions particularly well. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Can you read these labels so you've got a sense of what's actually being represented here? So by far and away the largest proportion are in hospital or hospice chaplains. There's a fair chunk of armed forces, schools and university and prisons that we would expect. There's a whole 16% of other chaplain or assistant chaplains, and they could be in a whole range of places. The most recent report I've got that breaks down the places that there are chaplains employed covers a whole range of different sectors. So there's sports and leisure. We've already got 2 people here who can talk about the work that's happening at Westfield or has happened at Westfield. in different firms, different areas, and one of our speakers tonight, Mark, and the court service would be represented by part of that yellow triangle. So there's a whole range of different places. I can put the link to these statistics in the chat if you'd like to see it, partly because on this page at the bottom there are some links to a couple of more recent research reports, one specifically about university chaplaincy and one about chaplaincy in the wider society. So I shall pop that in the chat at some point this evening. That's just a little bit of context on the variety of chaplains. There's also a very interesting point that is made here that quite a lot of these people aren't on the Church Commissioner's payroll. I'm employed as a diocesan employee. Linda and other NHS chaplains are employed by the NHS. Likewise, the Army employ their chaplains. So it's a slightly different way of being. And I think that's probably all I need to say about that. A quick run through the agenda. When I've stopped talking, we're going to have stories from chaplaincy, just some brief stories to explain what people have been doing and what their roles have been. And Robert's going to kick us off. When we've heard from everyone, we will go into a breakout room and a break, which will also include a chance for a tea break. And we've got a couple of questions that we'd like you to think about in that tea break time. And I will put those in the chat as soon as I've found them to copy and paste them. And we'll come back and we'll have an opportunity to just ask you to share what we've been thinking about, and then to ask questions of those of us that are in chaplaincy roles. And then we will finish with a closing prayer and any parish notices or any resources that we need to gather and collect up. And I will stake my hat on us finishing either at 8:59 or 9 p.m. I can't bear meetings that go on. So if we get to 9:01 and I'm still talking, feel free to just leave the meeting. But I very much hope that won't be the case. So, Robert, are you happy if I pass over to you now and I'll start making violent gesticulations in your direction after about 6 minutes, if that's okay?
Fine, Sarah, thank you. I'm not going to take 6 minutes simply because I feel a bit of a fraud. I've never really been an official chaplain to anything other than from about last week when I was processed as a new chaplain to the Air Training Corps. But I'm still discovering, so I might learn as much as anybody else here. I just thought, though, I'd start with my favourite definition of chaplaincy, which you will have heard, I'm sure, and that is being that presence that's keeping the rumour of God alive. As I said earlier, I was licensed as a reader, or what would now be called an LLM, back in 1993, which is an absolute age ago, and was then working in local government. I soon moved to Chelmsford City Council, where that was my full-time job. I joined the Christian Fellowship there, which met once a fortnight to have fellowship together and do Bible studies. Perhaps we could have a speaker in or something like that. And then the person who was running it soon retired, and I took over running that little group, and was the Christian presence, the Christian leader in that place, and carried on doing that as part of my reading ministry. I never thought about it as chaplaincy. I had a Bible on my desk. People would talk to me about my faith. That was just part of being a Christian in the workplace as I saw it. In 2016, I was ordained, and I took the brave decision to go and see the chief executive and ask him if I could have his permission to wear my collar around the office, which he gladly agreed to, being a Christian himself, which was lovely. And I then soon discovered the power of the plastic collar to change things. One thing that I first noticed was that as you walk around your workplace, You may wear a collar and a tie, as I would normally do as a chap in the office. And people would talk to me about work, and we'd have conversations about all sorts of things. If I then walked through that same office with a collar on the next day, people would do one of two things. Either they would come up to me and tell me that they needed to tell me their life story, or that they would do a double take and look the other way because they were scared to death I was going to ask them something deep and meaningful. And these were the same people that I'd had business meetings with the day before. So I hadn't, in my mind, changed, but that piece of plastic around my throat changed everything. The Bible studies continued, the fellowship groups continued, but the conversations, by being a minister in the workplace, I was never officially a minister in secular employment, but the minister in the workplace meant that I could have a ministry there where people would come alongside me. I wasn't given permission to proselytize. I certainly couldn't sort of try and browbeat people into the kingdom. Not that I would do that even now, but the questions came, more steadily. And one of the great privileges that I found as being recognized as a minister in that place was that people started talking to me about things like funerals and weddings. And so I also had the privilege of conducting a wedding for two colleagues. They married each other and were also friends, which was lovely. So that was the first wedding that I actually took as a newly priested minister. And then people started coming up to me, and one gent came up to me one day who I knew very well, and he said, "Robert, when I die, will you do my funeral?" And I was like immediately a little stunned, and yet I felt the deep sense of privilege that he was asking me in advance of, he'd had a serious heart operation 10 years ago. He was quite concerned about his health, and he then soon realized that he had a non-curable cancer, and he wanted to put in place the arrangements for that funeral. And so that, what a wonderful privilege. Similarly, a colleague who I used to sit next to asked if I'd do the funeral for her parents. So again, the privileges start to mount up. And when I decided that I was going to try for full-time ministry, which I'm currently in, one of my colleagues looked at me one day. We'd never had a serious conversation about anything religious or about church or anything. And she said, "We don't want you to go." I said, "Oh, that's really kind." She said, "No," she said, "you don't need to be somebody else's vicar. You're our vicar." And I think that, in a sense, perhaps is a mark of being that Christian presence, that chaplain in the place, that people start to see you as your own. And so whilst I was doing my curacy in a parish in the diocese, I also felt that, you could have a parish where you work. And so I'm passionate about self-supporting ministers, be they lay or ordained, because I believe that that person in the workplace for Christ is probably, for a lot of people, the only minister that a lot of people will meet. And so in the same way, I think that's true of chaplains everywhere. You're going to be the Christian minister that lots of people, the only Christian minister that people will meet. And so chaplaincy is incredibly valuable to the ministry of the church.
That was my unsubtle way of saying that's your time up. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. I was just about to stop at that particular second.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. So there'll be a chance to ask Robert specific questions or general questions later on, but we're going to move on to a very different setting now and hear from Bex. So thank you, Bex.
Hi, well, I'm Bex. I'm a lay chaplain, and as I said earlier, I'm chaplain to two colleges and also part of the chaplaincy team for Essex and Herts their ambulance. I wasn't going to share about the theology of chaplaincy, but it was part of the brief, and I just thought often chaplaincy is spoken about as a very modern ministry. I would like to challenge that perception and just put out there before I start about Martin of Tours, who is where the root of chaplaincy comes from and the name of chaplain, and he was around in the year 316 to 397, and chaplaincy comes from the storage of his cape, which he became a bishop, but he was originally a Roman soldier. He cut his cape in half, gave half of it to somebody who was homeless, vagrant, whatever, and so that they could be kept warm and serve those people. And chaplain, the name of chaplain comes from capelet, which was the French for the cabinet that the relic of his cape was then kept in, which is where the root of the word chapel and then chaplain comes from. So often chaplaincy is thought of as those outside of the church, the established church, so the chapel on the side, the people on the side, and I would say that very much establishes where my ministry is. And as the college chaplain, I'll just share some stories really. Chaplaincy is shaped by the needs and the requirements of the place, and by the character and skills and the faith of the chaplain or chaplains, and by what I would call divine appointments. Unlike prison and military chaplaincy, there is no statutory requirement for chaplaincy in colleges or schools. I work in the state school sector. I work for a charity, and there's really no real expectation either that in those environments there will be a chaplain. But my presence, although I'm not part of the place, is very much recognized as I'm a guest, but I'm a guest that belongs. So when it comes to college chaplaincy, and I'll talk more about that, and education chaplaincy, because that's my day job really, is we provide a pastoral presence, a spiritual development, and availability. And those are the three main limbs of what I do. And it's really much a calling, and those things overlap. So being a pastoral presence in the place by its very nature enables you an opportunity for spiritual reflection, prayer and availability for the young people and staff in those places. And as many of you all know, the mental health needs of young people are huge right now. The NHS report that 1 in 6 of our young people aged 6 to 18 have problematic mental health disorder. So being available for young people to talk to and to be a different voice and present for them is something that I very much do. And so it can look a bit like detached youth work. I walk around the sites. I'm available if young people need somebody to talk to. An example of that might be if a young person rushes out of a classroom, maybe having a panic attack. Just last week, a young person rushed out of a classroom. The teacher sort of followed literally as I was walking past. And so I looked at the teacher and when had a chat with the young person, it turned out they got their A-level exams coming up, but it was also the day before it had been the anniversary of the death of one of their parents. The other parent had got extremely upset. Also, one of their friends had died earlier in the year, and it would have been that person's 18th birthday just this week. So I said to the teacher, and the young person, do you want to have a chat? I'm the chaplain. And we went and sat outside and we talked about loss and bereavement and the process of that and the journey of that. We talked about hopes for the future. We talked about expectations, and that young person had so much that they wanted just to talk about. And it's about being a presence at the time for the people. So that's kind of like almost like detached youth work if you come from a youth work setting, just being available for the people as and when. And I would call that one of those holy appointments, because I wouldn't have normally been walking through that corridor at that particular moment, at that particular time. Another part of what I do within the college is I'm recognised as somebody there for pastoral support. So often young people who have experienced a bereavement or a loss or are struggling with something around their identity will be referred by the pastoral team to go and have a chat with a chaplain. And I might meet with that young person once. I might meet with them every week or every fortnight for weeks and weeks and weeks, but just as a safe, independent adult. And when I'm walking around the colleges, I say to the young people, I'm here if you need somebody to talk to who's not your mate, not your mum, and not your teacher. And I'm thinking Sarah's waving the clock at me. Have I run over?
Not if you stop talking now.
Okay, cool. I'll stop talking now then. I've shared a story and I've shared a bit of theology. That's good, isn't it?
There's not
Thank
a
you,
lot,
everyone.
not a right lot in 6 minutes, but we've got lots of stories to hear.
No, that's cool. I could talk forever.
Thank you. And Linda, you are going to talk to us next. And I think what I will do is I'll start waving this with about half a minute to go.
I'm going to keep going until I've said what I need to say. So you can wave away. I'm troublesome like that.
Okay,
no, I will try.
Oh, look. Excellent. That works.
Evil woman. Okay. So I was going to start where Bex started with old Martin of Tours. And the whole thing about Martin of Tours and healthcare chaplaincy is his cloak gave shelter to that beggar in the midst of the storms of life. And that's what healthcare chaplains do. We give shelter to people who are having a tough time. But there's a saint who, for me, builds on Martin's story, which I'd like to just tell you the story. This saint is called St. Melangeth, and there's her and Prince Brockwell and a hare. So everybody who is not sure, a hare is like a rabbit, only it doesn't live underground and it runs very, very fast. Okay, so these are the characters in the story. So imagine a group of huntsmen on horseback. They're thundering through the thick green undergrowth of a small, quiet wooded valley. Imagine the hullabaloo as the hunting dogs follow the scent of a hare. Horns are blaring, dogs are barking, men are shouting as they urge the dogs and one another on in the frantic chase. And leading the chase is the local prince, Prince Brockwell. The time is 607 AD. The place is the Pennant Valley in the Kingdom of Powys in central Wales. And Prince Brockwell and his men pursue the hare relentlessly up the valley until eventually the exhausted, hounded hare disappears into a huge thicket of undergrowth. And the hunters prepare to follow, but suddenly strange things begin to happen. The dogs turn back in fear. The huntsman finds he can't blow his horn, but he can't take it away from his lips. And Prince Brockwell, brave and proud, leaps from his horse. He won't show fear in the face of such magic, and he draws his sword and he begins to cut his way through the brambles and the shrubs. And there, as he breaks through the undergrowth, there in the centre of the clearing is a young woman, dressed simply, standing calmly, radiating a sense of peace. And at her feet, sheltered under her cloak, the frightened hare has crouched down for safety. Prince Brockwell has just come face to face with Melangeth, the daughter of an Irish warrior who fled to the valley to escape an unwanted marriage and to live a life of prayer and devotion to God. And used to being obeyed, Prince Brockwell demands she gives up the hare, but she calmly refuses. Angry and frustrated, he urges his hounds again and again to attack the hare, but whimpering, they shrink back until eventually the dogs turn tail and flee along with the huntsman, and the hare is left safe in its place of refuge, sheltered under Melangeth's cloak. And when I first came across Melangeth, that for me became my model of chaplaincy. Chaplaincy, as other people have said, is the ministry of availability, of simply being there, rooted in prayer, enabling the chaplain to provide sanctuary and shelter for people who are hounded by life's circumstances. And in the hospital, that could be patients, relatives, volunteers or staff, people of any faith or belief. And these are not weak people, people who are needy. Hares are a very noble creature. They don't need protection. So the people that we encounter in the hospital, whether it's staff, patients, relatives, whoever, they are people who need a moment of sanctuary just for a time. And we give them the shelter they need. And then usually they can just go and get on with their journey. And that shelter might look like giving somebody communion. It might be listening, praying. It might be signposting them to other resources or other services. It might be running a trauma debrief for staff. It might be conducting an emergency marriage or a baby funeral, a staff memorial service, or going to meetings to discuss trust policy or staff wellbeing or ways to enhance patient care. And Melengis gives a model for chaplaincy for providing shelter in a one-to-one or group context. But she also speaks to us about styles of leadership and being, because Melengis challenges the idea that leadership and being are about power and force. She offers a model of leadership and being that is gentle, humble, and rooted in prayer and trust. And from that, I draw the idea that healthcare chaplaincy has a prophetic role. Chaplains are there to remind the NHS at an organisational level that there is more to healthcare than the clinically driven model, which sees patients as conditions or illnesses to be treated and forgets that they're people who need holistic care. Chaplains are also there to remind the NHS there's more than being driven by targets. How do we provide a resilient system to ensure our staff aren't harmed by the pressure to perform against impossible odds? And we also remind the NHS of firm, compassionate leadership, which the organisation, the institution needs, because bullying and harassment are rife. So healthcare chaplaincy has got a really important institutional role as well about making healthcare more holistic, more human. And I just want to say one more thing. As you continue in your ministry, let healthcare chaplains support you in your work. Drop in for coffee, work in partnership with healthcare chaplains, and above all else, if you've got people in your congregations or where you work who work in healthcare, listen to their stories. Listen, 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 and let them tell you the trauma that they face day by day. A bit like Adam Kay, this is going to hurt. You'll hear stories like that. Thank you for your patience with me, lovely Sarah.
Thank you. Again, we can come back to all these ideas after the break. And coming next is Andrew, and then we'll hear from Mark, and then it will be my turn. Do you want to do it live, Andrew, or am I reusing your recording?
I don't mind.
No, you're here. You may as well chat.
Okay. I had a bit of a play at being a chaplain. I'm not a proper chaplain, but I had the privilege of kind of like falling into it almost like as a side hustle, really. I was a vicar in Beer Church, which has a big army presence. And I just found in my parish ministry, I didn't quite reach into the army patch. And I got a letter from the brigade padre inviting me to go for lunch with some of the army chaplains. And I had a very nice meal. And then they suggested that I thought about helping them. And it seemed to be that the more I argued with them that it was a really bad idea, the more convinced they were that it was a really good idea. And so very, very fearfully, I just said, Lord, I could do with this like a hole in the head, but I prayed. And the image I had was of the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the busy priest rushes by and the person in the ditch was a soldier in combat fatigues. And as amazing and swept up and awesome as the British Army was, I had a sense that there was a vulnerability there. And I said, okay, Lord, if this is what you're calling me to. And I very much made sure I did it under the permission of the brigade padre. And I had a wonderful two para padre who did a lot of encouraging. And basically the two para and three para padres were deploying to theatre in Afghanistan, and I was supporting the rear party, so I wasn't getting shot at. I wasn't doing the really scary stuff, but I was day to day working with folks who were under a lot of stress and in time, you know, a number of soldiers were killed in action. And I just want to share with you an initial encounter, probably my first encounter, even before I walked into the HQ of 2 Para. And there was a guy smoking a rolled up cigarette, and he, you know, looked fairly relaxed. And I just said pretty much the first thing that came into my mind. And I said, "Oh, I like your Help for Heroes bangle." And he said, "Thanks, Padre. Yeah, my mate gave that to me when he was dying in my arms." And at that point, I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me. And I just thought, oh my goodness, what have I said? You know, I've totally said the wrong thing. Fortunately, I was able to be one of Job's comforters before they start talking, and I just stood there and waited. And the guy just started to weep, and the, you know, roughy tufty guy, the tears just streamed down his cheek. And I just stood a bit close to him and almost shielded him from the footfall going behind us. And he just slightly hung his head and he just wept. And I didn't say anything. I just held that space, waited, didn't say anything. And then he took a deep intake of breath and just shared a whole load of life laundry stuff, emotional stuff that he was going through. And then he went, "Thanks for that, Padre," stubbed his cigarette out, walked past me, walked back into the HQ. And I thought, that's interesting. Even by saying completely the wrong thing and then listening and shutting up and zipping my lips and using my big pair of flappy ears and listening again squared, I may possibly have done the right thing. And I think that possibly set the tone for the next 10 years, really. And I only went in one long morning a week, and sometimes I'd pop in for other bits and pieces. But my work with 2 Para also took in 3 Para. And then when the Army Padres came back, I went over to the Med Reg and dealt with all sorts of tricky circumstances. The kind of stuff Linda is very, very familiar with. And just want to back up what Robert's been saying and Bex. It's a huge privilege. If you think you're a busy parish priest, it's totally refreshing. It doesn't actually take away from your ministry, it adds to your ministry. So if you're not sure, go for it. Do pray about it, though.
Thank you. You could have had another 3 sentences while I tried to unmute myself. Never mind. And we're going to hear now from Mark. Now, Mark has given us the text of the poster. I've put it in the chat. The poster that adorns the chapel in the court. That's correct. So if people want to have a quick read of this while Mark begins to speak, that will help him explain what he's been doing. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. It might surprise you to know that Snaresbrook Crown Court is the biggest Crown Court in the country. It's got 20 courts, which is rather a lot more than any other. It's a former orphanage, and it's the school orphanage closed about 50 years ago, and the Crown Court started up. And at the time, they just closed the chapel and locked it up. And so the chapel is very much state-of-the-art 1950s. About 5 years ago, Bishop Peter, Bishop of Barking, asked the parishes in the West Roding MMU, the Ministry and Mission Unit, to set up the chaplaincy again. Now, this MMU works really well. We're entirely separate parishes, but we do a lot of things together. And one of the incumbents was running the chaplaincy, but as he is also area dean and has also taken on being interim priest in charge of another parish with 2 huge churches, he asked me to take over a couple of years ago. And so I have tried to move it more to the pattern that I was more used to with Night Shelter, of becoming an ecumenical place. And that's difficult at the moment because COVID has meant that lots and lots of churches are well down on volunteers for every aspect of church life, but we're beginning. We're all lay people, but the three incumbents do come and celebrate Holy Communion at least once a month. And our manifesto, I can't see it up on the screens. Is it there, Sarah?
Sorry, fat fingers on the keyboard. I've put it in the chat. So
oh, I see.
Yeah.
Well, I will just read it out to stress what it's all about. It just says, and this is all over the court, this notice, it's not just in the chapel. The chapel is open from you on Monday to Friday between 12:45 and 2:15. Everyone working in the court or visiting is welcome. We are delighted to see people of all faiths or none. It's a quiet space in a very busy building. If you want somewhere to pause and think, the chapel is a place where nobody will bother you. If you'd like to pray, the chapel is a place where it may be easier to get your thoughts together than other places in the court. If you'd like to talk, there will be members of the chaplaincy team there. We're there to listen, not to lecture. And if you didn't know there was a chapel here, do drop in and have a look around. It's a beautiful place. We are all almost all retired people.
Mark, I'm having, anyone else struggling to hear Mark? I think you might have put your papers down over your microphone or something because you just cut yourself off.
Oh.
That's better. Whatever you just did just then, you've brought yourself back.
Right, yes. We're almost all retired. And so we have one or two extra little things. We always sit at the far end of the chapel, so anybody coming in can see us. And they can decide then if they want to come and engage with us, or they just want to sit in a pew, want to sit down and have their lunch, whatever. And the things with chaplains is the capacity to come and talk to them, or whether they just want to be left. The sort of talk we're looking for is the capacity for non-judgmental listening. And it is totally different from setting up rather smaller chaplaincies in night shelters, because with them you can train people fairly clearly on the sorts of issues they're going to get. There's just no predictability in the Crown Court. A lot of people there may be there for just a fortnight, just for one case. There's a huge amount of stress. There's at least 12 months waiting list for a case to come to court. Cases are being dropped because witnesses just can't face what's going to happen. They can't face reliving experiences. There's a huge shortfall of barristers, especially young barristers. And just about everybody who comes in is under some sort of stress, but it's different sorts of stress. One of the things I have taken from Night Shelter is advice I got from a very wise Catholic priest, because we were very much an ecumenical group there. And he said, you will hear stories that are terribly moving, stories that will bring tears to your eyes. They won't be true, of course, but there will be a truth behind them. And the truth is that these people don't want to be in the place they're in at the moment. And you've got to start from that. And that is actually something which we keep an eye on in our chaplaincy. I found myself once saying, Well, in the light of what you've told me, I'm not sure we should be praying for a suspended sentence, but we could pray for a just sentence, which may well indeed be a suspended one. And so that's what we do. We are linked at the moment very much with the MMU, and we are expanding into being an ecumenical chaplaincy.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions around that work when we come to our kind of panel time after a break. Before we go into a break, you get to listen to me. So you know that I am the chaplain to, there isn't anyone else, is there? I am last, good. I'm the chaplain to the University of Essex, and in the conversation I had with Andy about what that word was, I'm a chaplain in or of or to. The to is quite important because as Beck said, I'm also a welcome guest in the university. I'm employed by the church, I'm not employed by the university, so I don't sit within any of the structures in the same way that perhaps Linda does within healthcare. So I have a very odd marginal role. And in the University of Essex, which is a very secular institution, there isn't a chapel that is the heart of a campus in the same way there is in Oxbridge or some of the other universities. There is a great deal of suspicion around the role of religion. And there are multi-faith facilities which are usable by anybody, which by their nature are completely bland. So we have a room that has got 3 blank walls and a lot of windows, and not much else. We also have a faith, the faith centre itself is, if anyone's read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and remembers that bit about the planning stuff being down a staircase in a locked door behind in a filing case behind a locked door that says beware of the tiger, it's a bit like that. You have to know where we are to find us. You don't stumble across our space. So I have to say, when I meet other university chaplains, I generally have facilities envy, because I would love to have a space where people just walk past and see. So some of the things I would love to add into the community, like stop and do craft, or come and knit and natter, or come and play with Lego. Some very gentle activities that are just away from the frenetic place of life, are very difficult to put on unless I'm outside. And that's great in the summer, but it's not brilliant in winter. And a lot of what I do feels like sowing tiny seeds with people. So I was appointed in the pandemic. I'm just coming up to nearly 2 years in post now. I had to begin without the opportunity to do any holy loitering in the middle of the university, or to just stumble across people. I did a lot of walking with my dog, the chaplaincy assistant, in the beginning, which really helped, because it meant when there was nothing much else to do on campus, coming out for a walk with me and the dog was quite fun. And people would come for the dog and then sometimes come back and talk to me again, or come for a second walk, because that listening that we've all been talking about was so important. And there's a phrase that I've picked up somewhere, I don't know where I've got it from, about being a non-anxious presence within that frenetic and very pressured place. If you haven't been in a university for some time, you might have a slightly idealistic view about what it's like to be a student or even a staff member. And trust me, nothing is the same as it was when I was an undergraduate, or even when I was a postgraduate a few years ago. The pressures on staff are intense. There is a lot of casualisation of the workforce. There is overwork. Essex has been on strike quite a lot of the time that I've been working there, because of demands about pay and pensions and working conditions. Students are having lectures from 9 in the morning. Sometimes they finish at 7 at night. So actually, the old idea that you could run things over lunch break or early evening, they've gone out the window, because people's schedules are so full. They're mostly having to work to supplement their income, because Essex is a very, very diverse university. Something like 47% are Black and ethnic minority students. And a lot of those are first generation students into university. And a lot of those are coming from backgrounds where there isn't a large financial cushion to help them through. And there's all the mental health problems from the pandemic that are starting to make themselves known. So it is not an easy ride being a student in any way, shape or form. The last thing I will say is that, actually the last thing I'll say was two things. The penultimate thing I'm going to say is that when I first began the role, I chatted to a wise colleague in a different university, and I said, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything. I don't know how to do stuff. And she said, a lot of what university chaplaincy is like, and probably everyone else's chaplaincy role too, is a bit like that bit in The Karate Kid, where he's complaining that all he's been doing is polishing, wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off, and then suddenly comes into a fight and realizes that actually that has been building the reactions and building the muscles. So I would say 98% of what I do is putting wax on and taking wax off, and then the other 2% is when you bump into the person who needs that moment with you, or someone will approach you, or you have a conversation that really is a God-given conversation. And that, because of that, the challenge for me as an activist is that a lot of what I do is just being in the space, and I want to be doing, and I'm not always. So learning to slow and just walk and have time to stop and chat and to talk to everybody, from the cleaners up to the Vice Chancellor, as if I've got all the time in the world, is my big challenge when I'm walking around campus. I don't always manage it, but I try to be someone who is approachable for everybody, because it's a big old community, 17,000 students across the whole of the 3 campuses, about 3,000 staff. And as I say, that's everybody from cleaners, technicians, support staff, academics, and senior leadership. That's the bit of what I do. It's gone 3 minutes past 8. You're probably dying for a tea break. I'm going to stop talking and say, we're going to go into a break now. We've got questions for you. So I've given us, let's say, we'll come back at 25 past 8, but I'm going to put you in breakout rooms before we go for a break. So go off and get a cup of tea or whatever you need to do, and then come back into your breakout room. And then we've got 2 questions for you to have a think about. And this, I'm just going to copy them into the chat. I thank Linda for these questions. These were her suggestions. About chaplaincy. So the first question is, how does chaplaincy relate to the 5 marks of mission? And I've put those in the chat just in case they are not at your fingertips to remember what they are. And the second question is, how would you answer a critic who would find it ethically wrong for chaplains in a secular institution to be part of the mission of the church? So what is it we're doing, and how does it relate to the marks of mission in the church? And how do you answer those who say, actually, we don't have a role here, we're a secular institution, a secular society, if you would have it that way? So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, go off and have a chat about those questions, and then we'll come back at 25 past 8 and then just take some brief feedback from each group. So if you want to nominate someone to feedback a couple of sentences about your conversation, that would be perfect. I'm going to do these breakout rooms randomly, so we might end up with one of us that is all of us that are the speakers and none of us that are. Actually, Andy, have you done the break? Andy, are you listening? And have you done the breakout rooms for us? He's on his other call. Well, let's see what happens when I put this into breakout rooms. I should say cheerio and see you back at 25 past 8. Welcome back, everybody. Just waiting for the others to join us. I'm going to close that door. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was a useful small group conversation and also a chance to get a cup of tea. So we've got about 35 minutes left. I would be very interested to hear what people's conclusions were from the conversations about those two questions. So is there anybody from group 1 who would like to feedback in a couple of sentences? Go ahead, Jeff. Thank you.
We looked at the 5 mark submission, and what we really came up with was, for the most part, I thought the only one that was really relevant was number 3, to respond to human need by loving service. We did talk about, particularly with the sort of NHS and various other institutions, that transforming unjust structures might be part of it as well. So those were the 2 that we came up with for that question. We'll be perfectly honest, we weren't terribly sure how to answer the next question. It was very interesting that one of the guys Steve brought up was, if you've got a secular institution, it doesn't mean that everybody in the institution is going to be secular. And so it would be very difficult for them to say you can't be a chaplain to this institution because we're secular, because the people are not necessarily. And we did think that chaplaincy is not about necessarily, unless people specifically ask you, the other mark submission. So we weren't 100% sure why they thought it might be ethically wrong to be a chaplain in a secular institution, but we went down the road of really saying, it's about the people, not the institution.
Brilliant, thank you. Anyone from group 2 want to add their 2 penneth?
What group we were?
We also talked quite a bit about the tend and transform often being the core ones in terms of the 5 mark submission, but it's depending on your context. And we got a bit diverted, and instead of talking about the second question, we really started having a conversation about how you get into the chaplaincy, or how, if that's something you're already doing, that you move towards that becoming a more recognised role.
Okay, fabulous, thank you. That's perfectly legitimate conversation. What about the 3rd group? Anyone remember that they were nominated to talk back from the 3rd group?
I think I monopolised the 3rd group by asking how you became a chaplain, and we kind of got diverted into that. So I don't know that we very rarely, we did definitely touch on the subject, but I don't think we got to a nominated defined answer.
No, that's absolutely fine. And what about the last group? Anything from the last group on those 2 questions, or anything else that you were talking about?
I think Catherine's put in the chat box a recommendation for something that she's found very helpful, which is on BBC Sounds. So that we sort of discussed. I think we didn't get too far in terms of the conversation, but the first one, perhaps thinking, actually, I think it applies to all those 5 mark submission. I think are relevant. They may have sort of different emphases, but I think my own work in the NHS is both sort of pastoral to support staff and colleagues, but actually there's also challenge as well. So whether that be integrity of creation and unjust structures, there's also a voice that needs to be spoken sometimes and heard, to challenge sometimes. So there are different ways, I think, that we can actually offer that sort of chaplaincy role.
Thank you. And before we move on to open Q&A session, Would any of our speakers like to comment on what we've heard about those answers around the 5 marks of mission and being in a secular organisation? Yes, Linda, you gave us the question, so I'm guessing you've got some stories here.
I did say to my group, I don't know the answers, but it's really interesting that the whole issue of chaplaincy in a secular organisation and the ethical nature of that is really hot in NHS chaplaincy, because the humanist and the secular society actually don't think that anything to do with faith or belief should be funded by the state. So I suppose it's an extension of separating state from church. So they wouldn't want state schools to teach religion, either they wouldn't want Church of England schools. So for the secular society, that the ethics of the organisation paying somebody to do something religious that is about faith and belief. And the thing they object to most of all is the idea that the church sees chaplains as part of its mission. The secular society find that totally intolerable. That actually the so you've got people being paid by secular institutions to do the church's mission. I don't think they'd mind if the churches were paying the chaplains, and maybe they would. Maybe they wouldn't want chaplaincy at all in any secular institution. But that's kind of where that ethical question comes from, and it's very hot in chaplaincy.
I think CYO and Bex have come out with something really useful on this, is that rather than saying that the chaplain is there for people of all faiths or none, they say we're here for you whatever you believe, which takes away the negative kind of like tag on of none. And I think that is a really useful thing. We're here for you, whatever you believe.
Yeah, so the Humanist Society have written several documents where they object really strongly to the use of the word all faiths and none, because the phrase that is used is all faiths and beliefs. So chaplaincy is here for all faiths and beliefs. We're here for everybody, whatever their faith or belief. And that's really important in healthcare chaplaincy, because we often have conversations with people about shattered worldviews. It's not about what they believe about God, it's about what they believed about the world. The illness is then shattered. So the patient who's diagnosed with cancer, who thought they never would be because they've never smoked, they've never drunk, they've lived a clean life, they've exercised every day, that they believe if they live like that, they won't get ill. And then they're diagnosed with cancer, they're told they've got 3 months to live, and their whole worldview is shattered. It goes far beyond what you believe about religion or God, or what your beliefs, it's your whole worldview that gets shattered. And I don't know about other chaplaincies, but in healthcare chaplaincy, a lot of what we do is with shattered worldviews. So the whole talk about faith and belief becomes meaningless, because it's something much, much deeper than that, actually.
Yeah, Mark or Andrew, have you got anything you want to pick up on that echoes your experience?
I mean, you know, it's interesting to hear the criticism, but I think if you walked around the Medreg or Turn 3 Para, you know, you could have card-carrying atheists who know that padres add value because they listen. And, you know, if you approach it like a door-to-door salesman and are smashing people over the head with leaflets and, you know, tattooing them, you know, absolutely, you know, boot those people out. But I think if you go in with kindness, gentleness, love, you know, joy, peace, patience, kindness, you know, and just with an open mind, I think that adds value. And I just found, you know, it just an enormous privilege to walk into every sector of the army and just say, how's it going? And it was, you know, whether someone's fresh out of training or a chewed up, exhausted CO, you know, who was dealing with, you know, hell on a stick, and they could just let off steam. And they knew, because you're a priest, it wasn't going to go anywhere unless you felt it was a life-threatening situation. And actually, there's enormous freedom in that. And you know, if you're 50-50, if you're not sure, pray about it and go for it, because it is an enormous privilege. I just found I'd say a prayer before I went on to the camp, and invariably I'd have a God conversation amongst a lot of chats about weather and football and you name it. There would be a God conversation, and you'd almost wait for it before the end of the session.
Mark, you were starting to speak there.
I was going to say that I've lost count of the number of conversations that start. I'm not religious, but, and you know, you just wait, and it turns out that they are going to be talking about something to do with faith, and you find yourself saying, well, tell me about this God you don't believe in, because it's probably the same one I don't believe in as well.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, I'd just like to share, if that's okay. I totally hear what Linda's saying. What I find though is it's quite generational. So in the institution of some of the places is that the older generation are much more, and this is going to sound quite ageist, and I don't mean it to be, but fiercely secular and almost evangelically secular, as I've heard it described. And you can't be open, whereas actually young people are much more open to saying, so what is it as a belief? And actually what is that, and more respectful of each other. But also you're there, as Catherine said, as the chaplain for Seawago, and my shirt says, I'm here for you, whatever you believe. And it's quite large on the back, so wherever I am, I'm here for them. And I have people come up to me and say all sorts of things, and staff who will be quite rude about their secular views and how they don't believe in anything, later have mellowed and shared amazing things. And we've worked together on all sorts of projects that actually, you know, around remembrance or Holocaust memorial or refugee action or whatever. And gently, their views soften about people of faith. And often those very strong secular views, or sort of almost like, in a sense, it's almost a religion in itself, are softened because you're coming in as a person of faith who is not saying to them, you know, hell and damnation or whatever. You're just saying, actually, I'm here to love you.
Yeah.
I'm here to serve you. We are here to serve this community, and it speaks volumes.
We've been really lucky. Sorry.
Personally, I think that we have entered a post-Dawkins era where aggressive atheism has really lost its mojo in the cultural imagination, and the next generation down do not feel the same way.
And I think it's interesting at the university, where it's a very diverse community, that we've had student union sabbatical leaders this year. 3 of 6 of them have been people of faith, 1 Catholic, 1 Black Pentecostal, 1 Muslim, and they have worked really hard to get the needs of people of faith and faith recognised as part of people's identity, to be part of the fabric of what they're doing, in a way that I don't think has happened for some time. So that's quite interesting. However,
share one tiny little story.
You can.
Yesterday,
I'm going to say, before you do that, people want to be thinking of questions they want to ask. If you want to put them in the chat while Bex is speaking, and listen to her with your other ear, and then we'll go on to some questions. But
just
Bex,
the whole generational thing. Yesterday, I was running a project about stress awareness with Mind and various other people, Samaritans in the college. And a member of staff came up to me and said, so what is good about Good Friday? Because my 4-year-old grandson wanted to know, and I didn't know what to say. So we got 4-year-olds in our community asking what are the things that we believe, or why is it called Good Friday? So, you know, I had a whole conversation with somebody who didn't really have a faith about what is good about Good Friday. So there's opportunities, and it's just an amazing thing. And children are asking the questions.
Thank you. Okay, and talking of asking questions, what burning questions have we left you with so far? We haven't answered. You'd like more on? Speak now. This is your time. I say that's a really good question. What's the difference between chaplaincy and pastoral care? Who'd like to tackle that one out of our speakers?
Happy to do that. What I didn't share is we do quite a lot of spiritual development. So in the colleges, we provide space for people to pray. We provide opportunities for mindfulness, contemplation, things around remembrance, and conversations about faith. So it's more than just being a pastoral presence.
And in my role, I do offer pastoral care. That's a very key part of what I do, but I'm also speaking into the institution around issues of faith. So there is a teaching the institution issues there. So I sit on committees that look at inclusivity, University of Sanctuary, and the work that university does with refugees. And there's quite a lot of facilities management, which I wasn't really expecting. Anyone else wants to come back on the pastoral versus pastoral care? My answer would be pastoral care is part of chaplaincy. Chaplaincy has a wider remit of being present in an institution and speaking to the institution about the things that matter for the people that are in it.
So there's a prophetic element, and there's also challenging of injustices. So within my chaplaincy role, I've done quite a lot of work with young people about challenging what's going on with mental health and mental health support, and facilitated them to challenge the mental health services around that.
Yeah,
I think pastoral care, you're looking out for folks, but there were times where soldiers would see you as the God person and say, Padre, what do you think about? And you're not actually offering pastoral care, you're giving an opinion, and you're giving a God opinion as best you can. And sometimes that's actually making it up on the spot, but just trying to do theology on the hoof, you know. Padre, what do you make of how politicians are behaving, you know, when we've been working really hard?
Thank you. Our next question, what about holy loitering without a dog or natural spaces on campus to loiter? So those of us that have worked not on nice campuses with coffee shops on the squares, how do you loiter? What do you do?
Can I just throw in a couple of things that I did as a reader in my workplace? A Bible on your desk is always a good thing. It gives a message, even if you're not picking it up every 10 minutes. If you haven't got a dog collar, try and find a cross lapel badge, if you're allowed to wear badges. It doesn't have to,
Robert,
be
a
obvious.
dog, an actual dog, not a dog collar.
that won't seem better. My wife's just bought a Dachshund, and everybody stops and talks to us, so that's probably the best thing to do.
Maybe actually what we need to do is get a dog. Just have a dog and put it on your expenses. Sorry, Robert, carry on.
No, just little things. Take your lunch in the main meeting place, or if there's a lunch room, sit, take a book. It'll be a Christian book, I don't know, but just be available, and have something that communicates that you're there for people. If you have an official chaplaincy role, then get a chaplain badge. Is that enough?
That's interesting. So you said you were kind of doing chaplaincy without having the badge, but this is talking about a defined role. So I mean, I'm just sitting here listening to lots of things that people do as chaplaincy and kind of realizing that they had a name, if you like, in terms of what I've been doing. So sitting with the homeless, opening prayer tents, working with street pastors and listening to people's stories. That's very similar, if not the same, without actually having the title chaplain. So you do it without the title or with the title. It's just the title is something that gets bestowed upon you if the organisation you're with wants to recognise you as such in that environment. Is that kind of it? Yeah,
I think that's true, especially for self-supporting ministers in the workplace,
Yeah.
where you
I
may
would
not have
certainly
a
say
recognised role.
Yeah. But that's true in education. So we have pastoral mentors that we train to go into schools. They're not recognised necessarily as the chaplains, but the chaplains have a wider role. So, and the pastoral mentor might become a chaplain or might be seen as part of the team, but it's the recognition, I think, is one of the things. And we go around with these on look.
Cool.
So that's on my back when I'm walking around. You can't miss it, and it identifies us as somebody different from a student or a member of regular member of staff. So.
Bex, brilliant. Marianne, I can see you've got your hand up. I just wanted to ask Mark if he wanted to share anything of his experience of loitering. You've got a chapel to loiter in, that's very exciting, but how do you do it around the rest of the other space? Because you're all lay members, so you've got...
Yeah. If there are two of us on, then one can go into the canteen. One who I used to work with a lot, used to go and regularly have his baked potato, and he'd have his badge, and that's what the badge looks like. And so we're identifiable as a workplace chaplain, and people will see it, and sometimes they'll come and chat to him. But we can't go out of the chapel and leave it untended and open.
Right. Yes. So you've got to be rooted in that space for security, presumably.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. So Marianne, then Teresa, then Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the issue about kind of being given the role. I think there's a whole series of really important things about that. I think some of it is about being given the label of chaplain allows you to have some of that kind of institutional organisational role beyond the pastoral care that a number of people have been just talking about. But I think as somebody who identifies really strongly as a ministry in secular employment, I think it's also important.
Oh, that's a shame.
Oh,
that part of workplace that as a ministry in secular employment, which I think is quite similar to some of what we've heard about in the local government context, that you're known to be there primarily for the secular role that you're playing. Whereas the thing about a chaplain is that they've got an identity of being there exclusively for the God stuff. And I think that makes all sorts of differences, so, which are positive and negative, but it's a distinctive identity that is different from being there for your secular job and having the broader role of being recognised as a Christian ministry, but not authorised for that by the workplace.
Thank you. Linda, you were violently...
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. In my role as healthcare chaplain, we do everything we can to convince people that we're not there to do good to them, because that's what they're terrified of. And once they realise that we're not going to do good to them, that's when they start talking to us. That's when they'll start opening up. So I just wanted to challenge the idea that chaplaincy is about doing good stuff, because it very much isn't. And if you did that in the NHS, you'd get kicked out. And in terms of Mike's question, all I want to say is I interview countless people who think they're called to be a chaplain, and I wouldn't let them anywhere near any one of our patients or members of staff, because they think they're called, but they're not. And I think it's a bit like ordained ministry of any kind or lay ministry of any kind in the church. You can think you're called, but unless the institution of the church recognises that calling, you're on a sticky wicket. And I think it's similar with chaplaincy. They're, like I say, I interview countless people who think they're really good chaplains and they're not safe, and I wouldn't touch them with a barge pole. But then I'm nasty. So there we are.
And on that note,
okay, that's very interesting. What makes them unsafe characteristically, or what makes one safe?
Thank you. Let's hold that thought, because we've got Teresa and Andrew wanting to comment. So what makes an unsafe chaplain will be our next comment. But Teresa, you wanted to speak some time ago, so thank you for being patient.
That's right. Just to say, I think it is a distinctive calling, and obviously there are people who are just in the chaplaincy role, but I would argue quite strongly, being married to an army padre and doing some hospice chaplaincy myself, I'm actually a full-time teacher as well. And actually, as a Christian, I'm called to be a chaplain to anyone and everyone I meet in those circumstances. You know, whilst I'm at school, I'm paid to do the teaching role, but I do also feel very strongly I'm the chaplain to that school, because I think that's what I'm called to do. And I think all Christians, wherever they find themselves, we can fulfill that chaplaincy role, even if it's for that particular hour, that particular half an hour, as we meet and greet people. That's what Jesus did after all. And that's, I think, the model that we should be following.
Thank you. Andrew.
I was offered an office space and I decided not to go with it. And, you know, it's good to have a base. It's fantastic. I just found, I just wanted to walk around and catch people. One of the consistent things people would say is, "Are you busy, Padre?" And I would always say, no. And actually, if we're busy, we don't have time to chat. So the diary was full. Are you busy, Padre? No.
Yeah. Thank you. So the question that Mike raised just now about what makes an unsafe chaplain is a very interesting one. And I think from my point of view, I would struggle with somebody who didn't have a sense that secular university chaplaincy with a no proselytizing clause in our memorandum of understanding is not a space for evangelism. It's not a place where we hand out evangelistic tracts and enforce our views on people. We don't tell people that our faith is better than theirs, and we don't judge people based on what we might hold as a specific conviction about the way that people should behave. Those are some things that I would see as red flags. Anyone else want? Linda, you might have a list as long as you're on. Do you want to share some of those? And Bex and Robert and Mark, and Andrew, if you come across any other things?
I think my key one is lack of self-awareness. People who lack self-awareness are dangerous in pastoral settings. So we're looking for people who've got robust self-awareness and really strong boundaries, really clear boundaries about where they and the other person begin and end, and where the ministry begins and ends, where the boundaries of the ministry are. And I think what I see most often is what you've said, Sarah, people who think they can come into chaplaincy to convert people or to pray with them.
Yeah, any other comments on that?
I think with a chaplaincy or ordained ministry, beware the Messiah complex.
Yeah, I think it's important. You're not doing stuff to people.
Yes.
You're very much there with and alongside and journeying, and that whole, actually we're in this together and we're all journeying through this life. And if spiritual conversations then come along, then go with it and trust that that's a safe thing to do. One of the things that I think helps within my context with regard to safety is, you know, we are trained in mental health first aid and various other additional pastoral skills and bereavement support that, you know, I wouldn't want to do what I do without having that training, because it helps me be confident that what I'm doing is not going to make whatever's going on for that person any worse than it might already be. So it's that kind of whole balance. You're never going to fix stuff, you're journeying.
Anybody else done mental health first aid training? Yeah, if it's something you have the opportunity to do, I would absolutely recommend it, because it's a very helpful toolkit for when you meet people who are in quite acute, actually in chronic distress. And it was very helpful for me when I first started, because we have very sadly had a number of student deaths in the last 2 years. And I was always anxious that if I wasn't completely on call all the time, someone might try and get hold of me and they might not, and that might be the reason that they went on to attempt to kill themselves, and I wasn't dealing very well with that. So the mental health first aid training was actually very helpful in framing what my role is as part of an entire emergency response. We have 24-hour security who are actually the front line. It's not me. I can't do it as one person. So that was a real Messiah complex moment, actually, Andrew, that I think I'm that important that it might be crucial, and actually it wasn't. Anybody else want to comment before I go back to Linda?
So I'd just say that you will all have chance to do mental health first aid training from a provider called Kawa that also work with the NHS in October as part of IME2. So yeah.
And to a point about trauma training is also quite helpful. I did a very useful morning on trauma theology with Sarah College. Linda, and then one more comment and then we'll wrap up.
I was just going to quickly say, alongside mental health first aid, I would really recommend psychological first aid, which is a first line of defence trauma debrief, which is clinically proven not to re-traumatise people. So if you're ever involved in a really traumatic situation, if you're not trained, you can re-traumatise people. So psychological first aid is really, really good.
Right, this is your last chance to ask those burning questions, or it's only 3 minutes till we finish, whichever your perspective is.
I suppose the mental health first aid training is through Andy. Psychological first aid training, how do you access that?
I don't know. We access it through the NHS. There are lots of providers out there. They'll charge you about 500 or 600 quid to go on it, but we get it free in the NHS. So it's out there.
I'll find it.
You'll find it.
There's one for you to research then, Andy. Thank you, everybody. We've got a couple of minutes left. If you have got questions, then just do email them over. And if we can't find the answer between us, we will find someone who can. Could I say a very huge thank you to Mark, Andrew, Linda, Bex and Robert for your contributions this evening. It's been great to hear some different voices other than just me rambling about the university. Thank you, Andy, for inviting us to be part of your IME. And we've got about 2 minutes left. Any parish notices, Andy?
No, but the following round of applause, people are going to unmute themselves and make an unpleasant clapping sound. 1, 2, 3, go.
Well done, everyone. Thank you. Perfect. And while we're all unmuted, let's make a terrible noise and say the grace together, shall we? The grace
of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, be with us all. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It's been brilliant to hear people's stories and experiences. Have a good rest of the evening, and look, we're finishing at 20:59.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well
Thank
done.
you. Thank you.